How can people and the environment be protected from the flood of plastic that increasingly harms nature and human health? Representatives from more than 160 countries are meeting in Geneva to discuss exactly that in a last-ditch attempt to create a legally binding agreement to combat plastic pollution. It's hoped that the treaty can be signed next year.
Reusing trash right at the source. That could be the future to giving plastics a new lease of life. Here, scientists from the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia, are pioneering these microfactories, compact modular processing units that transform mixed plastic waste from sources like electronics into valuable new materials.
That's made out of 100% recycled plastics. So we've made this in our microfactory out of all the difficult plastics that are there in all the hardware like IT, printers and so on. And you can see that in our microfactory, these spools of plastic filaments that are made from 100% recycled materials are able to then be fed into a 3D printer.
A new approach to tackle the plastic crisis, but recycling alone won't solve it, experts agree. That's because the world is being swamped by plastic, much of which ends up in landfills or incinerated. In 2023, countries produced a staggering 413.8 million metric tons of plastic. To put that number into perspective, it could fill more than 500,000 Olympic swimming pools. And once disposed of, it leaks into the environment, killing animals, polluting our air, soil, the oceans, and harming human health.
There are studies that clearly show that plastic accumulates in organs, including in humans. There are publications suggesting that, for example, significantly more plastic accumulates in the brain than in the kidneys and the liver.
Roughly one garbage truck full of plastic is dumped into the ocean every minute, and less than 10% is recycled globally. At the United Nations in Geneva, more than 100 countries are in favor of a binding treaty and a clear commitment to reduce plastic production. This is the single most important lever to tackle the issue, according to marine biologist Melanie Bergmann.
These plastics treaty negotiations are a historical chance to get a grip of plastic pollution. And this is really important because we've surpassed the planetary boundaries for plastics already.
Headwinds come from plastic-producing countries in Southeast Asia, but also countries like Saudi Arabia depend on fossil fuels, which are used to make plastic.
Marine biologist Melanie Bergmann, whom you saw in that report briefly, is a member of the German delegation at the UN talks in Geneva and an expert on ocean plastic pollution. I asked her to tell us how the plastic crisis has worsened in recent years.
It's worsened a lot since every year something like 90 to 23 million tons of plastics are entering our waterways, including the ocean. So, yeah, and this just accumulates. Just recently, there was a report that 27 billion tons of plastics are just in the upper layer of the North Atlantic. So this just, and these are nanoplastics. So this just highlights the magnitude also of the dark number that we're not even yet aware of.
Yeah, those are staggering numbers, really. To effectively tackle plastic pollution, by how much would global plastic production need to be reduced, in your opinion?
This is very difficult to put a target on this because we don't have the scientific data to show this yet, unfortunately. However, it is clear from models that we need to at least reduce production by 12 to 17% to remain with our global climate targets. So this applies to carbon only, of course.
Some major manufacturers prioritize better plastic waste management over cutting production. What's wrong with just focusing on that?
Well, so far it hasn't delivered, I would say. And the other thing is, of course, there are many countries, especially in the global south, which don't have functioning waste management structure or as of now. So we would actually need to start from scratch there. And this will be extremely expensive. And if then, on top of that, plastic production will increase every year, and it's projected to triple by 2016, and something like 1,200 new plastic plants are in the making until 2027. So this just highlights the magnitude of the investments that will be needed to scale up. And even in the global north, our systems don't scale up right now, which is why we're burning it and why we're exporting it to poorer nations.
With multilateralism right now kind of falling out of favor, is aiming for a big binding treaty there in Geneva with tons of countries really realistic right now?
I don't know. I think we have to try, otherwise I wouldn't be here. And there were some good signs during the last round of negotiations. Around 100 countries supported calls for text in the treaty in favor of plastic production reduction and also regulation of chemicals of concern. So this is rather encouraging, I would say. Now we just have to build on this and see how far we can get.
How far would you like to get? So what outcomes would make you consider that these talks have been a success?
I think we need target on plastic production reduction. I think that's really important also to have an economic incentive for actually to increase recycling and also reuse system. So we have an economic incentive because at the moment many production processes are actually even subsidized, so market cannot work. So basically, this is really, really important.
So big task ahead there in Geneva. That was marine biologist Melanie Bergmann. Thank you so much for your time and all the best in these negotiations.
Thank you.
Now, DW Environment reporter Tim Schauenberg filed that report. He's following the Geneva talks on combating plastic pollution. Tim, you hinted on this and gave some impressive numbers there in your report. But briefly, give us a sense of the huge dimensions of this problem.
Yeah, for sure, Gerhard. The plastic crisis is bigger than you and I can maybe observe in our day-to-day life. It's polluting rivers. There is a plastic island bigger than countries swimming on the ocean. Plastic and microplastic is diluting into our drinking water, into plants, in our food. It's basically everywhere. There's almost no place on Earth anymore where you would not find microplastics, including the chemicals associated with it. As I reported, we can find it in our bodies, we can find it in our brains. So it's more than the visible plastic parts. It's everywhere, and that's why scientists warn and urge that we need to get a grip on the issue.
Yeah, and for that we need a legally binding international agreement comparable possibly to the climate agreement, the Paris Accords. What's standing in the way of that in terms of plastic pollution?
Yeah, well, the biggest challenge is for sure if countries can agree on a formulation to reduce the production of virgin plastic in the future. That is the biggest challenge, but at the same time, it's the one and only biggest lever, according to scientists, to get a grip on this topic. The second challenge is if we will see more further regulation on hazardous chemicals associated with plastics. There are 16,000 chemicals, and at least 4,000 of them are hazardous. For 10,000, we don't have any data, but they are potentially hazardous as well. So this is going to be a big question. And the third one is going to be, what about the financials? Poorer countries need money to ramp up their waste management system, to ramp up their recycling system, and they're asking richer countries to pay for it. And in my view, a fourth challenge is if countries are going to reach consensus on all of these issues, because that's the mechanism, the multilateral mechanism there. It's not majority vote, it's a consensus that needs to be reached, and this might dampen the expectations of an historic agreement some scientists have called for.
Now, can you briefly tell me, please, what an agreement might look like?
Well, I do not see an historic agreement in terms of a clear target for reduction of plastic production. What I can see is a framework to keep negotiating. Where I can see huge consensus is on the topic of waste management. This is where a broad consensus, even from fossil fuel producing countries, including the US, Saudi Arabia, blocking countries so far, can agree on to ramp this up, and also the EU and more progressive countries agree on a strong waste management commitment. I do not see a reduction on plastic production in the upcoming negotiations.
DW's Tim Schauenberg there reporting. Thank you very much, Tim.